Congressman Scott Perry, he brought up the idea of Congress being above the fray, not letting something like this interfere with what might be approval of a deal were it presented from the president. Can Congress be above the fray on this one?
Absolutely. I think we all want the information. I don't really get sitting in your office and watching on TV when a world leader comes to Congress, is invited to Congress, a co-equal branch of our government. I don't really understand that, but I certainly think that Congress absolutely will be above the fray. We need the information. We need the perspective. And I think it's wholly appropriate that the Prime Minister come when the deal is imminent. And with all due respect, you know, I keep on hearing about how the Prime Minister's visit potentially damages the relationship. No one's talking about the damage to the relationship that has occurred on the other side, where our president left the Prime Minister waiting while he had dinner, while the Prime Minister was caught, you know, off the mic talking about how unpleasant it is that he has to deal with them. What about that part of the relationship that is somehow left out of the circumstance here? We're talking about a nuclear-armed terrorist government. There's no room for error here. It's not, you know, tanks can come across your border and destroy some things, but you know, a country the size of Israel, it takes a moment. It takes a moment and it's over. They have absolutely everything at stake here, and they must be engaged. I think it's his duty.
Josie Sturman down in the Social Media Center has some new information coming in. Let's get to her. Josie?
Well, Scott, there's no more passion than what we're seeing on social media. We know your panelists are very engaged in this discussion, and our followers are as well. We're hearing from many of them, including Cindy, who says, it's official, we're the United States of Israel, except I don't remember seeing Netanyahu on the ballot. We want to hear your comments as well. Use the hashtag, your voice, your future. We're also hearing from many lawmakers who are speaking out on Twitter today, defending their decision to skip that speech from Benjamin Netanyahu, including from Representative John Lewis out of Georgia. He told one of his Twitter followers he was not ashamed of skipping that speech, said the floor of the House should not be used as a tool to re-elect a foreign leader. Representative Blumenauer also weighing in, saying Iran will always be America's enemy, question mark, not what many Iranians feel or want or what America has to accept. And we're also getting questions into our newsroom on this topic. Somebody says, what is anyone's alternate solution? I'm tired of hearing empty complaints. Provide an alternative. We know solutions are part of your discussion up in the studio, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Josie. And it's the discussion also in Jerusalem. Let's go back to the chief reporter from the Jerusalem Post, Gil Hoffman. Gil, Josie just brought up a comment from a viewer saying that it was a tool for re-election. I know that there was some concern from the Election Commission in Israel that wanted to perhaps put this speech on a 5-minute delay in case it became too political in favoring Prime Minister Netanyahu. How much of this do you believe is just politics and how much of it actually matters?
Scott, Netanyahu's been campaigning on the Iranian issue for 20 years now. No one can doubt how genuine his concerns are. He came to Congress back in 1996 and said the deadline for preventing the nuclearization of Iran is getting extremely close, which sounds even comical in hindsight. And nevertheless, it helps him out politically when you have congressmen who are attacking him, when you have Barack Obama respond in a way that's over the top, when you have Nancy Pelosi say that Netanyahu made her cry. I don't think it's Netanyahu's speech that will help him out politically as much as it's Nancy Pelosi's reaction. If Netanyahu wins this election and forms a right-wing government, then I think that all of those who oppose an agreement with the Palestinians in Israel should send flowers to Nancy Pelosi, who would be really responsible for its formation.
Interesting point there, and let's get back to our panel here, because a lot of people have been saying that the relationship is what really is under the microscope here, and is a relationship between the Likud party and the Republicans rather than with the president. We know that it's a strained relationship. That's a euphemism. That's putting it nicely, between the Obama administration and Benjamin Netanyahu. There could be 2 more years of this were he elected again in just 2 weeks.
Let me tell you what damages a relationship. Killing, being responsible for killing at least 1/3 of American and coalition forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, that damages a relationship. Killing your own children for the sake of jihad damages a relationship. Hanging young boys for being gay damages a relationship. Saying death to America damages a relationship. And I'll tell you also what damages trust with the American people. When we have an administration who sends out Susan Rice, for example, saying that during these negotiations, Iran's nuclear ambitions have been halted, when everybody knows the opposite is true. The centrifuges are still running. The plutonium program is still going. The enrichment is still going. They're still developing their missile capability, but for some reason their sponsorship of terrorism is still going.
Is it fine to believe her, though,
separate.
when she says something like, we won't accept any deal? It has to be a good deal, not a bad deal, or there's no deal. Is it fine to accept that from her?
Rice said that we're going to keep the pressure on Iran. How can we believe that's true when they're threatening to veto congressional sanctions which are going to keep the pressure on Iran if we don't get the deal? Why is the onus on the Obama administration to convince us that Iran wants peace? Isn't the onus on Iran to convince us that it's going to keep its word when the history shows that time and time again it has failed to keep its word? It's violated its agreements. The IAEA has said itself, Iran, just yesterday, Iran is lying. It's impossible for us to monitor them. They have secret facilities.
Do you have any confidence in the policies underway, Alan?
Well, one thing I can say is if there's not going to be a deal, then all of the things that Brooke just outlined are going to go ahead. And if Netanyahu gets his way and there is no deal, then his prescription is ratcheting up sanctions. But we know that sanctions have not stopped the Iranian program. We know that assassinations of Iranian scientists didn't stop the program. We know that the Stuxnet may have delayed the program a little bit, but it didn't stop the program. In 2006, Netanyahu warned us, this is 1938, and the Iranians are Hitler. And that kind of rhetoric, that kind of exaggeration is not useful in the debate. It's a debate. Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. Excuse me, I did not interrupt you.
When in history has a piece of paper...
Excuse me, I did not interrupt.
When it's a forum for debate, it's a conversation.
Okay, go ahead,
When in history has a piece of paper ever stopped a fascist regime from engaging in war, especially when it, time and time again, it admits publicly, we want death to America. We want nukes. These negotiations are going to fail. The Iranian regime came out and said that just the other day.
You've written off the agreement before seeing the agreement. And my position is, I don't know if I'm going to support the agreement. I want to see the agreement. President Obama has said that he's going to be transparent about the agreement. It will be open to debate. It will be open to controversy. Be open to analysis by experts. Of course,
after the deal is made.
After the deal is made, absolutely.
That's not
because
a debate.
you do not.
That's not analysis.
Because
Congress
you do
should
not.
Be kept in the
because
loop.
you do not make public your position in confidential negotiations when you're getting right up to the end game, when this is the crunch time in these negotiations. Well, and this is the time when the parties are going to look at each other across the table, and who's going to blink, who's going to make the concessions. Now, Brooke knows in advance already that Obama is going to make the concessions. I don't know that. I want to see. And then I'll make up my mind.
And that's where there is, and I understand your point that, look, you and many people argue that there hasn't been transparency, so why would there be? You are saying, look, this administration can't divulge certain things while a sensitive deal is being struck. And we're going to come to you in just a second, but what I'd like to do is play a comment that we got earlier about the idea of checks and balances in a process like this from Alan Dershowitz. Here's what he had to say.
We have a system of checks and balances, and when you're making a deal of the kind that the administration is proposing to make with Iran, you must get the agreement of both branches, and the Congress must have an opportunity to check and balance and scrutinize any deal that the administration wants to make.
Is that fair, Alan?
No, not exactly. I'm not. I wasn't born an American, but I became an American. I had to pass a citizenship test, and what I learned in passing that citizenship test is that we have an executive branch and a president who's the commander-in-chief, who's in charge of foreign policy, and we have a Congress which is in charge of the budget, in charge of legislation, in charge of oversight,
and as world powers,
consent,
and in charge of advice and consent on treaties.
Exactly.
And that's the Senate's job. And so I understand that the arrangements of a negotiation sometimes have to be secret, if that's the right word. But two of the issues are, one is trust. We've seen the track record of the administration, number one, and that part of the world, quite honestly, is not in the greatest shape in the last 6 years. And that's weighing on our minds.
Of course, it was in great shape before that when George
Well,
Bush,
it was in better shape
president.
than it is now, arguably. But that's up to that's conjecture.
And
but
by the way, Netanyahu was one of the chief cheerleaders for the war and the invasion of Iraq.
What are you talking about? So was Britain, so we're all coalition forces. To fault an ally for coming to our aid and supporting us when we asked not only Netanyahu, but Tony Blair, and we asked all the coalition forces to support us. Now to go back and fault Netanyahu for supporting us in our war in Iraq, that's ridiculous.
Let's ask Mort Klein what he thinks about that.
He argued for the war, not supporting the war. He argued. He came here in 2002 and gave testimony. He was a private citizen at the time.
It was based on intelligence that not only Republicans but also Democrats agreed with and voted in favor of.
As did Kerry, as did Hillary Clinton.
And this whole deal is predicated on intelligence from the International Atomic Agency that it does the inspections. They have no enforcement power. All they do is inspect and
that
report.
was pointed out today.
And that's all they can do. So they can report that this happening, and it will be happening. It's happening right now. There are 8 Security Council resolutions that Iran is in violation of right now, yet we're willing to let them just continue with those violations and negotiate from that point on. We should, quite honestly, to establish trust, we should take that back and say, if you want to make this deal, go back and start complying with those Security Council resolutions. Well, and that's stop enriching. There's no peaceful reason to enrich. There's none of the other. I come from a district that has 3 Mile Island right next to it. Right. We didn't have to enrich to operate that plant, a peaceful nuclear plant, but it had a problem, right? This is too dangerous. It is too sensitive. We cannot make a mistake.
Well, and some would argue that actually rolling back some of these sanctions, or at least the idea of an end date on these sanctions, plays as an incentive for Iran to deal with us. So that's yet to be seen, but I want to go to Mort Klein, see what he thinks about all this. Mort?
First of all, President Obama will have the same problem even with Netanyahu's opponents, Herzog and Livni, who have publicly stated they're on the same page as Netanyahu on this issue. So the problem is not Netanyahu. The problem is the policy of President Barack Obama, who a year ago promised us he would make sure that there's going to be no centrifuges allowed to be kept by Iran and no uranium. It'll have to be gotten rid of. And now, of course, he's allowing 3.5% enrichment, which in a few weeks can be hiked up to an area where you can have nuclear weapons. And now he's talking about 6,500 centrifuges. And even as we speak, he's allowing research and development on centrifuges to make them even faster, meaning there'll be a shorter time before they can break out and have nuclear weapons.
All right, let's go back to the Hill. I want to talk now, I want to bring into the conversation Bob Ehrlich, former Maryland governor, Republican, also whose name has been bandied about, possibly as a presidential contender in the future here. So my question for you, Governor, is what good came from this today, if any?
As good as it gets when it comes to influencing an audience, making his case. He's articulate, he's charismatic, he's telegenic, and he speaks the truth. So, of course, this was about politics, but it was also about substance. I've been listening, obviously, for about the last 25 minutes, and Brooke has made, and Congressman, I've heard a bunch of very good points here, but the bottom line to today is, of course, it was a political show, and of course, it was about substance, and of course, the stakes could not be higher. And the denominator to this whole debate really is the deficit, I guess the trust deficit, I should say, this administration suffers presently in the United States of America. There's just not a lot of trust throughout this country, particularly in this Hill.
All right, let's hear from another Democratic voice in this argument. Let's counterbalance here. Earlier today, I also spoke with Congressman Jim Moran. Now, Jim Moran of Virginia, a Democrat, retired his long-held seat, and that gives him the ability to speak freely, perhaps more freely than in the past, although he was never one to hold his tongue. Let's hear what he had to say about the optics of all of this and, of course, the possible repercussions. Let's talk about the politics involved here, because you, having just retired, have the liberty of speaking freely where others may feel bound to votes. How much of this controversy was purely political?
Mr. Netanyahu is a politician, and he's got an election in 2 weeks, and I just don't think he should be using us to tip the scales in his advantage. And I think that's a very legitimate concern that the members who didn't go to the speech, I can understand why they decided not to.
But is that an excuse for them to not go? I mean, I can't imagine that many politicians are really that concerned about appearing to favor one particular candidate in another country's election.
That may be the case. But it's an explanation for some of them. In the long run, I'm really not sure that it is to the benefit of Israel in the long run. They need friends on both sides of the aisle.
Prime Minister Netanyahu choosing not to meet with Senate Democratic leaders. There's got to be, it's a personal issue. There has to be some kickback from that, isn't there?
I don't think any member of Congress is going to make up their mind on this one particular issue. It's an accumulation of things, and unfortunately this is consistent with the politicization of this relationship, and I do think that the majority in the House has tried to use this to their advantage politically, financially.
Because you are no longer a sitting member of Congress, you have the ability to speak freely that perhaps some others might not feel that allowance. Why do you believe, aside from a joint press conference this afternoon, so many Democrats may have said, I'm not going to the speech, but they don't want to talk about it?
Right. I don't think it, I think by their absence, that spoke strongly enough. I don't think there's anything to be gained by further inflaming passions. Mr. Netanyahu made a statement. They made a statement. The president is going to speak with the virus place.
Should President Obama have met with him?
I don't think so, because Mr. Netanyahu never asked if he was going, never told him he was coming. No, I don't think there was any purpose or responsibility for the president to meet with Mr. Netanyahu. This was a clear, intended slight of the president. There's no question about that.
All right.
Okay. I mean, what is this, a monarchy? Like, you have to ask the permission of the president to speak to the American people?
What happened to the co-equal branches of government? Each one has its own right to do exactly that. We want the information. And Israel, if any country, should be involved. They should probably be involved in the negotiation. If you think about it, where's their seat at the table?
And how about the comment Bibi Netanyahu wanted to tip the scales his way? Yes, he certainly did. He wanted to tip the scales toward Israel, toward the freedom-loving world, and away from the largest sponsor of terrorism in the world. So of course he did, and I hope he did.
I just want to address the elephant in the room.
Can I say something?
Here,
Please.
Which is that all my colleagues here clearly hope that this deal fails. And it may well.
There's nothing clear about that whatsoever.
And it may well fail. And if it does fail, I have no confidence that sanctions are going to stop the Iranian nuclear program. And the elephant in the room is that puts us back on a path to military action. Not Israeli military action, because they have a limited capability and they can't destroy the Iranian nuclear program alone. Otherwise, they probably would have done it by now. But U.S. military action. And I think that that's one thing that you should be telling your constituents very clearly. If this deal fails, or if you guys manage to sabotage it in the Congress, which I'm sure you'll try to do.
Nobody's going to sabotage it.
I'm sure you'll try to do. We are back on the road to war.
First of all, how can you be so sure we're going to try and sabotage it? It's the president and the administration who has gone back and forth. We're going to give you the deal to approve. We're not going to give you the deal to approve. Back and forth. So that's unclear. And number one and number two, we're given a false choice that it's either this bad deal or war. What we're understanding from what we're hearing, the portions that we're hearing, is the greatest thing we can expect is for Iran to be allowed to be nuclear weapons armed in 10 years. That's the best deal we can make, and we're supposed to accept that.
We're fearful a weak administration will cut a weak deal. That's what I'm fearful of. That is correct.
If anybody is
more Klein, the congressman just said a bad deal or war are kind of the two alternatives here. Is that the way you see it?
Of course not.
We don't see
the alternative. The alternative is a good deal,
Yes,
where you do not allow Iran to maintain their uranium, and not allow them to maintain their centrifuges and make it clear if they do it, you're going to have strong sanctions where they're going to start, their economy is going to start faltering again in a very serious way.
And
by the way, this is not
work. That's correct.
This is not political. If Netanyahu was not running for office in 2 weeks, he would still want to come to Congress now to speak, because the deal is going to be finalized, God forbid, a bad one, by March 24th or March 31st. That's why he's coming. The election is completely irrelevant here. It is not political whatsoever. Let me say something else no one has said. Hillary Clinton, several years ago, when she was Secretary of State, talked about we need to have a nuclear shield if Iran gets nuclear weapons. There is the proof that containment is really the policy of this administration. They really are allowing Iran to get nuclear weapons, and they're ready to have a nuclear shield. They're not...
and the American public needs to understand how the predicate has changed here. We're welcoming the largest sponsor of terror in the world into the nuclear club on a slower time frame. That's the bottom line.
Let's talk about the scope of that in perhaps a broader context. If we can cue up soundbite number 4 here from the speech today from the Prime Minister, when he talked about the grave threat that faces obviously not just Israel, not just America, but we're talking about a large portion of the Middle East and beyond that. Let's play that.
In this deadly game of thrones, there's no place for America or for Israel. No peace for Christians, Jews, or Muslims who don't share the Islamist medieval creed. No rights for women, no freedom for anyone. So when it comes to Iran and ISIS, the enemy of your enemy is your enemy.
How does that complicate matters?
It's the truth. I mean, the truth is not complicated. What's complicated
But coming up with a solution is then, isn't it?
Well, look, I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room, okay? We are not talking about solutions because the Obama administration, the Democrats, have made this about a cult of personality and about Netanyahu. It's a perfect Alinsky ploy to divert attention away from the real issue, which is how to contain Iran, onto Netanyahu. Does he have a right to speak? That's not the issue. The bottom line is that Iran has calculated that the best way to have a nuclear weapons regime is to enter into a deal which allows it to build its nuclear infrastructure legally and not to have any economic sanctions. And when this sunset clause comes and it's free to build its nuclear weapons and Russia is trading with it and China's making money off Iran, it knows that there's not going to be the political will for the entire world to get together again and build a sanctions regime to contain Iran. It knows that when the IAEA comes and reports to us, as it has time and time again, that Iran is violating the deal, that we won't have the political will to do anything about it. The political will is now. Now's the time that we have to deal with Iran, not 10 years from now when it already has the bomb.
Is the sense of urgency then being misunderstood or understated? Do you think that we need to be more furtive in actions now, that words, that negotiations don't go far enough because the message can't be taken seriously by
Iran?
That's
why I like the speech today. Today was about politics and optics, but it was about substance. And I think it moved the ball forward with regard to the American public. The American public needs to understand the facts here. And obviously, and that's really the bottom line to today. We can talk all about the optics and the politics and who didn't come and who struck John, but this is about the substantive deal with Iran, period. That's the issue, and that's what the American public and the world needs to understand. Where the United States is on that paradigm.
I agree with the governor and the future senator. I think that what the American people got today is kind of a glimpse into...
A little endorsement in there?
Not necessarily, but you know, it'd be nice to see him run. I think he'd make a great senator. But I think the world and the United States, the citizens, need to kind of internalize the fact that in 10 years, you think about the growth of your child in 10 years and how quickly that goes. We go from a state where we are now, where it's not controlled well, but we're at least making attempts to control it, to a full-blown, autonomous, nuclear-armed terrorist state. that is not a rational actor, that has avowed our death and the destruction of Israel. And that's the life that we will then lead, and that's going to be the action on the field and the domino effect in the region of a nuclear proliferation in the most unstable portion of the planet.
All right, more client shopping to get in on this.
And that's the result of changing the predicate now, here and now, in this negotiation. That's the result.
Mort Klein.
And it's remarkable. Why is President Obama defending this enemy, Nazi-like regime of Iran repeatedly and attacking and criticizing Israel, our ally, especially when Iran has thousands of political prisoners in prison, has executed 1,000 political prisoners in the past year alone, throws gay people off the roofs and kills them. There's virtually no women's rights. And yet, President Obama is defending this vicious regime. And the deal seems to be, in 10 years, there's going to be a sunset clause where all restrictions will be off, and they'll be able to have nuclear weapons within 10 years.
And we're not saying no negotiation. We're saying negotiate from strength. Trust but verify. Nobody's saying walk away from the negotiating table.
All right,
but just to have a deal is not good enough.
In just a second, we'll get to Josie. First, though, Alan.
Well, I don't think that you hold negotiations on nuclear weapons hostage to women's rights, much as I favor women's rights. If these negotiations fail, right now Iran is 3 months away from breakout. These negotiations aim to extend that to 1 year. If these negotiations fail, the inspectors will be gone, the hardliners in Tehran will be back in charge, and they will say these negotiations are not about a nuclear deal at all. They're about regime change. Now, in the best of all worlds, I would like to see a different regime in Tehran. But this is a negotiation with a power, not a defeated power. They haven't unconditionally surrendered like Japan did at the end of World War II. We can't dictate terms to them. We're negotiating. We're trying to get the best deal we can. Let's wait and see what it is.
But the hardliners are in charge. I watched the speech. I watched Rouhani's speech, and he echoed everything that Khomeini said. The hardliner. If this is the moderate portion of the.
There are millions and millions of Iranians who want to become part of the family of nations.
God bless them. We hope they can, but they have got to show, the country has to show its actions by what it does, not what we hope and they hope it will be. They have to stop imprisoning political dissidents and conducting their...
Let me ask you this. Why did President Obama do everything to get rid of Mubarak, an ally, and not an extremist radical Islamist? And when it came to Ahmadinejad, when there were hundreds of thousands of people in Iran saying, let's get rid of Ahmadinejad, Obama said, it is an internal issue, it's not our problem. He has shown sympathy to radical Islamic regimes over more moderate regimes, and that's one of the reasons he's being so soft and easy on Iran potentially getting nuclear weapons. Right. And we have to ask that question.
And how can Obama claim protocol not to meet with Netanyahu when he's secretly meeting with the Muslim Brotherhood as it's engaged in plans to overthrow the current Egyptian government? I mean, it's completely hypocritical.
Where does that come from?
It's reported. It's reported. He's meeting with members of the Muslim Brotherhood as they are actually
there was a recent
when I have gone
in the
counterterrorism
please let me respond. Involving the White House and the State Department recently, there were allegations that some members were representative of the Muslim Brotherhood, and there were conflicting reports on that. It still seems very gray.
When I've met with
national security discussion incredibly bizarre. I mean, soon you're going to be bringing up Obamacare as well, no doubt. I mean, throw the kitchen sink at the guy. I'm feeling a little kind of one lonely guy here, surrounded by
all the things I'm talking about.
Former governors and perhaps future senators.
How did things go in Syria? How did things go in Libya? How did things go in Yemen? Yemen, the president cited Yemen as the model for success for us in our anti-terrorism campaign.
And Somalia.
So I'm not throwing the kitchen sink in. I'm throwing the facts in. Unfortunately, there's stubborn, unfortunate
How
things.
How did negotiations with the Taliban?
Thank you very much.
I mean, we released their top commanders who went
Let's let Governor Early get in quickly. The show's wrapping up. Governor?
Please interject.
They're in a position of strength because they do not follow the rules. They ignore the UN resolutions. They do not follow the rules. So we have one side not following the rules, doing what they want to do on their own time schedule, negotiating with the weak administration who wants a deal because of legacy. That's a formula for disaster.
When I have met with National Security Council people myself in Washington, they tell me the brothers are here regularly. That's their term for the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is officials in the administration telling me the Muslim Brotherhood is there regularly, and yet they complain to me, why doesn't Barack Obama invite the head of Egypt, Sisi, who's become an incredible ally against terrorism, only this week citing that Hamas has now become a terrorist group under Egyptian rule, and yet the Muslim Brotherhood is there all the time. Al-Sisi is ignored by this administration, one of our real friends.
What does this have to do with anything?
It has to do with credibility and trust.
It has to do with the credibility. It has to do with the credibility that Barack Obama really wants to stop this radical Muslim Nazi-like regime from getting nuclear weapons when he shows such sympathy to the Muslim Brotherhood and such enmity to people like Al-Sisi.
You can't ignore the history. You can't ignore the history when you get the American public to buy in.
What's his
You can't ignore the history here. You're trying to get the American public to buy into it.
I will give you this. I will give you a second here because you've expressed that you feel beat up here a little bit. Let me just say, you do believe that there has to be some faith, even if Brooke and others will point out that there is reason perhaps to be a bit distrustful or skeptical. You believe that we have to let these negotiations take place, that there are conversations we should not and are not privy to. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And do you have faith that those negotiations can bear fruit?
I don't know. I have no idea. The president said the other day that he thought that the chances were still against it. I am not a prophet, and the gift of prophecy was removed from the Jewish people a couple of thousands of years ago. You know, when I covered the State Department, the spokeswoman, Margaret Tutwiler, when she was asked a hypothetical, she used to say, I don't do what-ifs.
With due respect, Israel can't afford for you to be wrong. Israel cannot afford for you to be wrong.
No, I'm just saying that's
the problem. We're going to have to stop you there. Very true. There are many what-ifs in this conversation still to be debated, still to be held, and we will continue that conversation. We are so thankful you could join us. Panelists, thank you for being here, and of course, our friends on the Hill as well. Have a great night. We'll continue this debate tomorrow.